Joining me, Basil Smikle, former chair of the New York State Democratic Party and an MSNBC political analyst. Head spinning. I'll just, open up the curtains a little bit. Hair and makeup people came in to check me just now, and they're exploding. Yeah. It's hard for every American to follow what's going on. So can the Democrats follow it?
Ken Martin's a really good step in the right direction. I've known him for a number of years. When I was at the New York State Democratic Party, we supported him in the position he had before this, which was head of the Association of State Democratic Committees. Why is that important? It's because as a former state chair, in that position, he knows how parties work. He knows the infrastructure. He knows what it is to be on the ground. He knows what it means to put the troops in the field to go and talk, push the message. And so being able to work with the individual state parties to rebuild that infrastructure and make sure that everybody's on the same page, as he talked about, is going to be critically important to moving forward.
Remember the first time Trump got elected and got inaugurated, and there are all these protests out on the street? We have not seen that. The Times looks at it this way. The lack of public outcry has left Democrats debating whether liberals are simply tired of politics or whether they agree with more of Mr. Trump's platform than they want to admit. I mean, the first job one has to be figuring out where your party stands or where the people who could vote for you are, right? And is there anybody who has any clear handle on that at all?
I may get in trouble for this, but this finger pointing is really problematic. This should not be a consultant class conversation. And frankly, I don't think a lot of this conversation needs to be generated from D.C. If you look at what's happening in both parties.
So not from Ken Martin?
Not necessarily. No, well, Ken is a little different because he's about taking over the party nationally and really digging into state parties. But what I mean by that is if we have two parties where so many of the voters within each party don't trust the federal government, don't trust Congress, you can't necessarily look to Congress for all of those answers. A lot of that work has to be done on the ground, being hyper local and hyper targeted. Democrats have had some really good leaders that have been able to push back. Look at Chris Murphy, look at AOC, look at Jasmine Crockett from Texas, who's been doing phenomenal work. Democrats have held the president accountable. They impeached him twice. There's a Democratic state attorney general.
But they lost every single battleground state.
Understood. And let me explain to you one of the things that the Republicans did over time. There was a separate campaign to get people to stop smoking menthol cigarettes. The Republicans targeted black voters in Michigan, saying Democrats were going to take away your cigarettes. By mail, they did this in the mail. So my point is that one of the things that Ken can do and what Democrats can do is be so hyper targeted and hyper local and make sure that effort is sustained. We don't need to go through this for the next 6 months to a year and then get back up and running. That needs to happen today.
Well, arguably, you don't have 6 months to a year because the midterms are, as you know, as somebody who was chair, man, they come fast.
They do. They do. And, one of the things that again, is really fascinating to me is right now when I move through and I've been traveling the country and giving talks and on panels, and voters are not necessarily asking what are they doing in D.C. They're saying, how can we protect our communities today? What can we do on the ground today to make sure that whatever Donald Trump and his supporters are going to do doesn't affect me in the ways that it possibly can? And that's one of the things I think Democrats really can excel at is, again, going to ground, giving activists and leaders the tools to be able to fight in their communities. That's what folks are asking for right now. And let that leadership germinate from the ground up as opposed to top down.
I thought it was interesting that Ken Martin said he views his job as being the guy who's willing to take the low road, that he's the guy who's willing to throw the punch. And then I guess the other folks, can do what they need to do in their states, their communities. But what do you anticipate from him, and where should he take his first swing?
Well, the first swing, I think, is doing exactly what he did, which is come out and saying this is one party and speaking with one voice. Because, again, I go back to that earlier point. A lot of that finger pointing is not helpful whatsoever. From a policy
Give me a reality check on that happening, Basil.
Well, that's the problem. And that's why I go back to this point that, I was here all through last year angry at my own party for getting rid of the president of the United States who was running for re-election. Not helpful. Tore down a vice president for the last 4 years, sometimes anonymously in the press. So by the time she becomes the nominee, she sometimes, in some ways, had her legs taken out from under her, and even then did a phenomenal job in those last 4 months. So my point is, we need to get out of our own way. Democrats need to speak with that one voice. I think Ken can do that. But at the same time, I think we need to go to ground a lot earlier than we have been and do it in a way that smacks Donald Trump day in and day out.